Alright, so this is the brand new Firebird from Pivot Cycles. It's just landed in Australia. This is the 5th generation of the super popular Firebird model. It's designed exclusively for racing on the Enduro World Series, so all about speed and durability. It features a lot of really cool tech that we haven't seen before, like a trunnion rear shock. It's a 165 travel in the rear, 170 out front. It features size specific geometry, but we'll get onto that a bit more later on. It's a 2.9er exclusive, however you can drop a 27.5 rear wheel in there, and we'll get onto that later as well. There's 4 sizes available, small through to XL. So yeah, we've had this bike for a couple of months now. Scotty's been riding it. So let me ask you some questions, Scotty. First off, how is it to set this bike up and get comfortable on it?
Yeah, funny enough, like there's been a lot of changes, like subtle changes from Pivot, from their like predecessors. Obviously the way the shock's mounted and the suspension platform and whatnot as well. So it was actually a little bit trickier to set up initially and get it dialed. However, now that I've ridden it for a while and I've got the bike dialed, you really do notice why this is their enduro race bike. For a big travel like 170 front, 165mm back enduro bike, this thing is really, really good to pedal. A couple of little cool things I noticed about this bike in particular was the fact that you could shift your weight really well. So for a big travel sort of enduro bike, it was very easy to get your weight onto the front wheel when climbing, and that front end sort of didn't wander as well. One thing I did know about this bike as well, how supple this thing is over all the nice light trail chatter as well. Once we got this bike dialed, it's got plenty of mid-stroke support in the fork, plenty of mid-stroke support in the shock. However, it's really, really nice and light over all that sort of trail chatter. So for a big travel bike, it pedals amazing, but obviously when we're getting into descending is where this thing like obviously comes into its own.
Awesome. Well, the one thing that we really know about Pivot, and one thing that's sort of really famous for, is the quality of the frame. The frame builds are pretty much second to none. Run us through some of the highlights of the new Firebird's frame. Some of the little details which you might not notice at a glance.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, it's a bit hard to tell, like, you know, from your TV or your computer at home, but when you're buying a bit more of a boutique bike, you can really see how these guys, especially Pivot, have gone to that extra length and, you know, attention to detail. All these new linkages, if you actually have a look up close, are really, really neat. There's all bearings through the rear end. It comes with a flip chip, as JT just mentioned before, where you can actually put a different headset cup and flip this upside down if you want your bike to be a little bit more agile, but also if you want to run the mullet set up with a 27.5-inch back wheel. But one of the really, really cool things I've noticed about this bike is all the little protection pieces. So underneath the frame guard, your chainstay guard. One little cool feature is the fact that the dropout hanger for your derailleur will rotate backwards under impact as well, so it's going to save your rear mech if you actually cop a hit. But even on the inside where the rotor, and that is, so if you bend your rotor, it's not going to bang up against your carbon frame. It even comes with a little cover for your rear linkage. So a lot of bikes, you know, when you're out in, you know, in the mud and the lime and whatnot, they tend to sort of get a little bit of mud in that little rear linkage area, and obviously you want to keep that clean because that's one of your main pivot points, one of your main load points. So they've actually made a little custom cover over that so it keeps all the dirt and grit out of your bearings as well. This is how much attention to detail these guys have paid. Is under here you've got a little mount for your actual tools or your spares for if you're racing enduro and whatnot as well, and it's got a little rubber cap here as well, so it's going to save from rubbing underneath your top tube and whatnot as well. So they really have sort of thought of everything when it comes to an enduro race bike.
Mate, a lot of people when they buy a bike are going to go and maybe chuck a bigger fork on, or play around with the rear shock a little bit, but out of the box this can already come with a coil and a slightly offset fork, so it's got a higher travel fork.
Yep.
What do you reckon? Has Pivot nailed it on the head straight off the bat?
Yeah, like, it's a burly bike. Obviously, you know, Revolution is based in the Blue Mountains, there's no secret about that, and with COVID at the moment we've sort of been stuck around the Blue Mountains to do a lot of our test riding. But if anyone's ridden in the Blue Mountains, they know that this is definitely a proving ground for sort of, you know, giving components a very, very hard time. A lot of natural stuff, heaps of rough, fast sections. So, and this sucker has eaten everything for breakfast. I mean, the new Fox 38s up front, super good, super plush. You know, the front end tracks extremely well. When you're tearing through sections and you think your front end's going to give way, it really does track the ground well. And the rear end's, you know, super supple. So, I mean, I set my bike up a little differently to some people. I like probably run my suspension a little bit firmer. I run my rebound a little bit slower. I like the bike to have a nice sort of planted feel. With this bike, I mean, I know we don't really talk too much about bike setups, and I won't sort of go into that too much, because that it really is a personal thing. But this bike for around here isn't just, I find, for your full-on enduro races. If you're the type of guy who's very gravity orientated, wants a bike you can pedal, is definitely going to turn heads at the coffee shop on the weekend, then this sucker is the goods.
Awesome. Mate, let me ask you, compared to some other bikes you've ridden now from different brands, where does this thing kind of stack up, and what's kind of what's going to be similar to? What kind of?
Yeah, look, it's hard. Like, that's a very, very tough question. I mean, I'm lucky enough, and so is the rest of the test team at Revolution. We're lucky enough to ride a lot of good brands and a lot of really, really good bikes. This is obviously right in there with the style of bike that I personally like to ride. So as far as bikes I've had, then yeah, this is right up there with one of the better bikes I've had. With that said, if you're in the mountain bike game these days and you're not making a good quality bike, I mean, you're not really in the game. These guys are obviously making a top-notch quality bike. I mean, as far as mountain bikes goes, these guys are really twisting the bar and sort of taking mountain bikes to the next level.
Yeah, Pivot definitely are setting themselves kind of on their own path there. Now, one thing we mentioned before, which I want to get back to, is the size-specific geometry. Okay, so this bike comes in small, medium, large, XL, 4 sizes. Tell us a bit about what the size-specific geometry does and how it works.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like the crazy thing. I mean, a lot of other brands, you're getting a bike that's going to be either shorter in the rear end, shorter in the front end, and they're not going to really change much in the way of the suspension kinematics and whatnot as well. However, these guys have done that. I mean, the whole reason they've gone with a shorter rear end, depending on what size bike you get, or a longer rear end, and they've even changed a little bit with the angles of the seat post and how slack the bike is. The bike, as I said before, really is custom fitted for you, and the suspension kinematics are designed to suit the height of rider that's actually going to run this bike. So overall, it's not just like a shorter rear end, or a longer front end or whatnot as well, or a shorter front end. The whole bike itself is custom fitted for the actual size of bike that you're riding.
So it's a real no compromise approach to fitting a bike to so for instance, if you've got a very small rider, Pivot know exactly the style and performance they want to get out of this bike.
Correct.
So they're going to have the same, essentially, the feel and reaction as someone's 6'6" going for an XL.
100%.
That's pretty cool.
So they're super attention to detail, and for a brand like that to really commit to all those changes, it obviously just goes to show that they really care about their customers, they really care about the riders, and they really want to give their riders the best riding experience. So to date, I've really enjoyed riding this bike. I'm looking forward to riding it a bit more. For a big, long travel, enduro style bike, one of the really key elements to it is it's super nimble. Corners really well, still eats all the rough stuff, jumps really, really, really well, and is super planted overall, that sort of nice light trail chatter. So that transfers traction to the rear wheels. You can really tell the difference between the suspension kinematics on this bike and some of their previous models.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, guys. The brand new 2022 Firebird from Pivot Cycles, available in Australia through Jet Black. Head to your local dealer or jump online for more details.
You.